Hello, I'm Eric Kane with Updraft Model Works, and this is the first in a series of how-to videos on building plastic model kits. We'll be starting today with just the basic tools that you need to get started building models. You're not going to necessarily build any high-quality museum kits out of this, but it should be enough to put something together that you can put on your desk and be proud of. If you haven't been in the hobby before, this should be a good video for you, or if you're just coming back and you want a refresher. If you're intermediate, this is probably not really necessary for you, and you can come back on later videos. But let's get started today with going over the basic tools, and we'll go in later videos on how to actually assemble the model kits and use those supplies and tools that we discussed today. This was a kit made with pretty much just the basic materials that we'll be going over today. I did use a spray paint, but that's optional. Other than that, we'll jump into all the selection process of different options that you might have available to you and what some of my recommendations are. So let's start. We'll set this one aside. Just start discussing the first and most important thing, obviously, is identifying the model kit that you want to build. You probably want to pick a subject that is of high interest to you, something that's relatively easy to build to start with, and relatively cheap. So some of the things that you might want to consider is a lot of manufacturers will provide what they call a skill level in the box. So I have a couple examples of some Revell kits here. You'll notice this one's a US Revell kit, and it has a number 2 listed on the front. And this is indicating the skill level. They have recommended ages, etc. It tells you in this particular case that this is a glue together kit. If you're doing snap together kits, you won't need the glue, but your options are much more limited with snap together kits. On the back of the box, they have a listing of what their scales mean. Different manufacturers will sometimes list different skill levels, and the majority of them, number 1, is more for the very beginner level snap together type kits. And growing numbers as complexity goes up. This particular kit is from Revell of Germany, very similar, same company but in a different location. And in this particular case, where did they have it? And maybe you can see on the very edge of the box here, there's a number 3. But in this particular case, there's actually a skill level 1 through 5 versus the 1 through 3 that we saw in the last kit. So, like I said, different manufacturers, even within the same major company, can have their own scales on that. And you may find some other kits, like this particular Hasegawa kit. There's actually no indication of skill level whatsoever. More than likely, that'll be a glue-together kit. Okay, so once you've made your selection of what kit you're going to build, obviously if you're doing a glue-together kit, you're going to need some sort of glue. The vast majority of us that have been around for a long time have probably used these tube cements at one point or another. That's where I started out. Today we've got a lot more options in terms of liquid cements, but these are still available, probably one of your cheaper options. In this particular case, these are made by Testors. The blue kind is supposed to be a non-toxic, doesn't smell as bad. I don't find it works quite as well as the stronger stuff, but these are both options for you. If you're going to use some sort of tube cement like this, it's very thick, you might want to use some toothpicks to actually apply the glue exactly where you need it, as opposed to putting globs of glue everywhere. But like I said today, most of what we use are liquid cements. Sticking with the Testors for the moment, they have a kind in a bottle like this. They also have a little dispenser bottle with these, have a little tip to apply the glue exactly where you want it. If you're using a bottle like this, I like to use a kind of older or cheaper fine point paintbrush to apply that so that you're not getting it everywhere, because the applicator with the Testors bottles tends to be very broad and covers a lot of area, which we'll show you in some of the instructional videos on how to apply with a finer tip. You can also find other brands like Plastrux here, Plastic Weld. This stuff works on ABS plastics in addition to the polystyrene that you get on most model kits. And then there's the Tamiya Extra Thin brand. They also have a regular kind. The Tamiya Extra Thin is probably my favorite of all these options. The applicator is very fine. It's easy to put the glue where you need it. It reacts very fast. It bonds very strong. And the bottle's hard to tip over, which is an important thing because this one's empty because it did tip over. So all sorts of things to consider. These will cost you anywhere from probably a couple dollars for some of these basic tubes to $5 or $6 for one of these larger bottles. Now probably the most important tool that you're going to use is a hobby knife. I like to use a handful of these around the shop just to keep them available at any time. You can go with getting these kinds of extendable blades. I don't really like these because I don't find them quite as sharp. They also are less stable. They kind of move around a lot, whereas the blades on these are fixed. And so I highly recommend you go with a blade that tightens in like these. The most common type of blade that you're going to find is this number 11, which is the straight edge here that tapers down. There are a variety of other curved blades and smaller blades and other shapes, and vast majority of those you won't need except for very special applications. So if you can get a knife blade, get some extra blades to go with it. You're probably going to need, my recommendation is at least 5 for one model kit. You can buy packs of 100 if you're looking to be frugal and plan to do more than one kit. They're also useful elsewhere around the house, so it's probably a good investment if you can do it. I like to get the kind that has a hexagonal shape to it, as well as this protective cover on it, so when I'm not using it, if it rolls, which it's harder to do with the hex shape, but if it does roll off, it doesn't stab you or you don't accidentally hit it. This particular one's got a lock feature on it, and then like I said, this is a hexagonal shape, so you can see this knife rolls a lot where this one does not. So plenty of options out there. Brand doesn't necessarily matter, but choice is up to you. These will probably cost you anywhere from a couple dollars to $5 or $10 if you want to get a bunch of extra blades and covers with them. In addition to your knives, you're probably going to want a surface to cut on. I like using these types of cutting mats. They're fairly cheap. They protect all your work surface. If you're going to be working on your kitchen table or an office desk or something you want to protect, it's a good idea to use something like this. Even on my workbench, which is really a bench, I still like to cut on this. It's a better cutting surface than most materials. But in a pinch, you can use wood, you can use cardboard, or as long as it's a very dense cardboard, or perhaps something more like the box that your models come in. But any of those are not as efficient as the cutting mat. So if you can afford it, this is definitely a worthwhile investment to protect all your furniture. Now, when you're gluing parts together and you're trying to hold it together while you're applying your glue, you're gonna want some sort of tape. You can always use the traditional blue painter's tape. It's good, fairly low tack, sometimes too low of a tack depending on which version you get, and it works pretty well for most applications, particularly just holding parts together. You can also get more specialty hobby style tapes like this Tamiya brand. These are specifically designed for models. They're a little bit thinner. The tack is really good. It's tacky enough that it holds together, but not so tacky that it pulls tape or paint off your model when you're using it for masking. So either of these work pretty well. Obviously this is fairly cheap. This is a little bit more expensive, but this is pretty good if you can afford it. Now, once you start putting some of your parts together, you're going to find that sometimes they don't fit the way you thought they should, or you've got little bits hanging off from the sprue after you cut them off. So that's where you're going to need some sort of sanding paper. You can start with sanding films like these. A lot of times you'll get some in a variety pack. You can see this one here costs roughly $6.50. These come with a variety of different grits. Each color is a different fineness on the sandpaper. The plastic film is really good for being flexible and getting into tight spaces on models. You can use them wet or dry, and so they have a lot of flexibility in terms of applications in the model world for these. You can go and get stuff at like a hardware store, auto parts store like this, and I use it more for the finer grits. But really, you're going to be better off getting some sort of hobby grit sandpapers for general use on building your models. Now, I do actually prefer over that is using sanding sticks like these. There's a bunch of different varieties you can find at your local shops. Different sizes, different grits, etc. Any of these will work, but if you're just getting started, at a minimum, I'd recommend getting kind of a medium and a fine grit. They'll come in different colors. Just pay attention to what the labels are. A lot of times the colors will match more like these sanding films. But at a minimum, those are probably the ones you want. You can also buy them in a full variety pack that provides 5 different types. But that's my recommendation for sandpapers. Alright, so let's move on to paints. Now, obviously, after you've selected your kit, you're going to probably want to get paints that match the particular aircraft or vehicle, or whether it be a car or a tank or whatever you're building. You're going to want some colors that match the particular model that you're trying to build. In this case, we're going to cover aircraft primarily, so the basic colors that you're going to want to get are obviously things like white and black, and then always good to have some sort of silver, some sort of green probably. So in this particular kit, we'll have some sort of silver here. I added some black to the silver to make the exhaust in the back. Got black on white on the landing gear and the missiles. You have green on the pilot and some of the pilot seats. So those are kinds of things that you're going to be looking for, and then pick a color for the outside of the aircraft, whether it be a gray or a green or a camouflage pattern or something like that. But let's go over the particular types of paints that you can get, because that's probably just as important as the color. In the US here, we've probably got the most common brand you're going to find is Testors Model Master. These are available in the acrylic kind, as well as you'll find enamel-based paints. As a beginner, I highly recommend that you start with acrylics. These are easy to wash up with water. They're not as toxic. They don't smell as bad. And it's just, in the industry, has kind of gone more towards the acrylic paints these days. The enamels are more for specialty applications, although you still find a lot of these in hobby shops today in the US. So just pay attention. The label will say acryl for the Model Master series if it's acrylic. Otherwise, you should be able to see that it's enamel paints. These small ones are typically enamel paints as well. You can see here. So we'll move these out of the way because you need to have extra solvents and things to deal with the enamels. Next, you may also find Tamiya brand acrylic paints. These are solvent-based acrylic paints, so they have a little bit more smell than the Model Masters, but they're really good as well. Both of these have a decent variety of colors available. The Model Master tends to be a little bit more focused on the military, U.S. military type of applications. Tamiya is very much more into the automotive as well as kind of World War II colors. So if you have vehicles in that particular range, you might find colors like that. Next we have Citadel. These paints are intended really for model gamers building just miniatures and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of fantasy-based colors. They have a lot of brighter colors available, so stuff that you can't find in these other lines. They're also a lot thicker. They're really good for brush painting. Perhaps too thick in my opinion, but they'll do a good job for some of those colors you can't find in the other brands. And then another option is Vallejo. The Vallejo brand here comes in these kind of eyedropper bottles. They also have an air line of paints. So you'll see in this particular case, this is Model Color. They also have a Game Color that's very similar to the Citadel line. If you see Model Air or Game Air, these are intended for airbrushes. And so since we're beginning right now, we're going to try and stay away from the air line of paints. We'll set those aside and go with just the basic brush application style paints. As a beginner, I think these are probably a very good option for you. They brush in my opinion, probably the best out of all the brands here. They have these eyedropper bottles, so even if you do leave a bottle open and it falls over, you don't get a big mess, whereas these will make a big puddle. So these are all options for you. They'll all do a good job. Pick whichever one you find is available and has the colors you're looking for, and we'll go from there. Now, obviously, you're going to need some sort of paint brushes to apply your paints once you've purchased them. So my recommendation, just as a starter, is to go with some sort of value pack like these. You can find these really cheap. This one's probably the most expensive of the three here, and it probably costs about $10. I built a lot of model kits using these kinds of cheap brushes for a long time. You do get better results from more expensive brushes, but until your skills are started or you're serious about it, these should do you just fine to get a model started. And then as you get into the hobby, you can go ahead and spend your money on the more expensive brushes, but more expensive brushes won't make your technique better. So don't worry about spending the big money right now. Just get something that has all the shapes that you want. If you're going to be spray painting, you probably don't need big wide brushes. Just the fine tips are fine. If you're going to be hand painting the whole model with a brush, some sort of wide brush like this will probably be something you'll need. With the acrylic paints, you'll want to go with something that's soft. Coarse brushes tend to leave a lot of brush marks, and you'll usually see most paint brushes are applicable to most types of paints, so you don't have to worry too much about that. I just like some of these Teclon brushes, and there's a lot of options for you, but this will do just fine. Now, while you're painting, it's always a good idea to actually pull your paint out of the paint pot, so not dipping straight into the bottle. So we like to use paint palettes so that you can mix some water into it. I actually like to use just old CDs that either I got free in the mail or ones that I'm no longer using, etc. You can see here I've used this one pretty heavily as a paint palette. They're cheap. They're perfect surface. The reflective surface kind of makes the colors come through very well. They'll take any solvents, so it's a nice surface for applying glues as well. So I like these. You can use other things like use yogurt containers or lids for various types of foods and such. I've applied paint and glue and stuff to the lids of my model boxes as well, but the cardboard tends to absorb the paint, so it's better to use something that's non-porous like a plastic, and ideally something that you can dispose of so that you don't paint over something important. Obviously, you can, if you don't have used ones like this, you could actually buy a brand new set of unwritten CDs for about $10 for about $50. So give you lots of paint palettes. I usually go through maybe one of these or two of them during a model kit. Now, like I said, for acrylics, you're going to use water to wash up. So if you're looking to be on the cheap, you can just use some empty containers, just a water cup I got at a fast food restaurant when I ordered water, yogurt containers, whatever you can use to hold water, and that'll be useful for cleaning your brushes when you're done painting. And lastly, when you're doing your paint application, you might want to protect your surface with some sort of newspaper, or maybe if you want to go to a hardware store, you can buy this kind of paper roll to put down. You can use plastic sheet, whatever. Just keep in mind the paint surface that you're applying to. If you make a spill, you might want to not damage your table, so put something underneath your work surface to protect it. So let's review what we went over today. And for our next video, I'll be showing you how to build a model kit. I'm going to go with the Rafal M variant here from Revell. This is in 1/72 scale, and it's an all gray color scheme, so it should be a very simple paint scheme to produce. And let's go over the materials that we needed again. So I purchased an X-Acto knife with 5 spare blades. That'll cost you about $7. I'm going to use this paintbrush set right here, which costs about $10. I'll be using these 5 paints from Vallejo. Each one is approximately $3.29 when I bought it, so that'll be about $17. We'll be putting the kit together with the Tamiya Extra Thin Cement and some standard Elmer's white glue. Those glues combined will cost you $7. I'll use this Tamiya masking tape, which this roll costs about $5. And we'll be using this medium and fine grit sanding stick, which combined cost about $7. Let's do some math here. Okay, so the combined cost of all these the supplies is $53. Obviously that does not include tax necessarily, but you can see for about $50 you can have all the materials you need to get started building model kits, and pretty much all of these will last you for more than just one kit. You might need a few extra knife blades, and you know, everything else should be sufficient to produce more than one kit. The kit price will be up to you depending on what subject you choose, what store you happen to buy it from, how old it is, etc. This particular kit I got for about $27. You might go for something else on sale. I got this one for about $14. And it's actually a Hasegawa kit, which is typically regarded as higher quality in the spectrum. So, you know, it's just totally up to you as to what model kit you want to purchase, but so obviously less than $100, you can go ahead and build potentially a couple model kits. Okay, and before we go, I kind of wanted to show you basically where I've come from in the past relative to where we are today. This kit, like I said, was built using just the materials we went over today. Nothing fancy, no airbrushes, none of the other fancy tools that you can get as you move along. But 20 years ago, this was my first model kit. Surprisingly enough, I still have it buried here, but it used pretty much all the same techniques that we're going to go over in the next video. The only exception is that I didn't spray paint this model where I did this one. But otherwise used all the same tools that we went over today, and just goes to show you how much technique can matter more than your tools. You know, some things to pay attention to, like, you know, I had decals that came off. Later we'll figure out how to make those stick on better. I had glued some of the parts upside down. A bunch of parts have fallen off over the years and broken because of the way I glued them, but you know, it just goes to show you, if you stick to it for a while, practice makes perfect. Even if you absolutely change nothing in terms of the tools and supplies you're using, you can get really great results with just the basics. Well, thanks for joining us today. I hope you learned something. Keep in mind that no professional artist ever started as an expert. They all started from the very basics and built their skills from there. So even if you have any uncertainty about whether or not you're going to be able to build a good model kit, you got to start somewhere if you're going to get there. So go ahead and jump in, give it a shot, and you know, if it doesn't turn out, try it again and keep getting better. We'll talk to you next time.